Hey everybody, this is Dr. Brown. I hope you are surviving the quarantine and all. Well, technically, I guess it's not a quarantine, but not much opportunities to get out right now. Right now, I am hiding in the basement of our house with a bunch of kids running around upstairs. So if you hear any banging or shouting or screaming, that's completely normal. That is happening all the time around here. Let's get started. Welcome to another session of Nature Unbound. You completed your homework yesterday, which was reading and some questions about this chapter, Exploring the Nature of Energy Flow. Now we're going to delve into it a little bit deeper here in part 1. What do you think of when you think of energy? Perhaps you think of something that looks like this. This is our famous 5-hour energy. Why do people take 5-hour energy? What does that mean to use that term energy? So the book defines it as the ability to do something. The ability to do, what's that blank? Well, let's give some examples of what would be in that blank. So for instance, what do you need energy to do yourself? You need energy to walk to school, or in this case, sit at home and watch a video on your computer. So here you are walking to school, of course, with your clear little backpack. You also need energy to do something like make a sub at Firehouse Subs. Or you need energy to do a chore like mowing your lawn. These are all tasks which require this mystical word energy. So we like to define energy as the ability to do work. Where does this energy come from? The energy that you use to walk to school, the energy that you use to make a sub, the energy that you use to mow a lawn. Where does this energy actually come from? Where does this ability come from? That's a great question. That's a question we're going to be addressing today as we study the flow of energy. And since this is field biology, we are going to be looking at the flow of energy through ecosystems. What is the ultimate source for all energy? This was a question in your homework. And hopefully you put the sun. All energy on planet Earth is coming from that sun, with a few very, very minor exceptions which are outside the scope of this video. But how does that energy actually get to you? If you were to go lay down, well, let me change. If I were to go lay in the sun for a long time, I don't just get energized and charged up like a rechargeable battery. Instead, I just get a big old sunburn. Sorry, that looks a little gruesome. That's actually just a sunburn. So there's some sort of conversion that happens between the sun and us. We don't get our energy directly from the sun. It's indirect. How does that work? Hopefully you're thinking about something green, something perhaps like a tree, or maybe grass, or even a flower. These are all organisms. They're living, of course. They're biological living organisms that are called producers. These are called producers because they take the sun's light energy and they convert it into a different form of energy that can be used by other organisms. And this process is called primary production. Now, perhaps you've heard of this referred to as another term, something you probably learned in middle school or elementary school, the term photosynthesis. So what photosynthesis is, to break it down to its bare bones, it is the process whereby the energy in the sunlight is converted into some different form of energy that's usable for both the plant and other organisms can use it as well. The plant does this by taking carbon dioxide and water, and then it uses that energy from the sun to convert these molecules and rearrange them into glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen, or O2. Now the cool thing is we need these things. So these are both very important for us to survive. Oxygen, of course, we breathe, but glucose is not just a sweetener that you use to sweeten your favorite beverage. It's actually a molecule that's packed full of energy. Think of it as a truck that's transporting energy. And this energy is going to be transported through the plant, but then from the plant into other organisms. This glucose that the plant produces is stored in a lot of different forms throughout the entire plant. For instance, it's stored in cellulose. This is the substance that makes up the structure of the plant's cell walls, so the leaves and the wood. It's also stored in the fruit of the plant. And don't forget, do you remember when we tapped those maple trees in that sap? We boiled it down into a rich, very sweet syrup. So that was just loaded with glucose. Because producers are responsible for taking the sun's energy and converting it into a usable form of energy for other organisms along with themselves, the amount of life that a particular ecosystem can support depends on the amount of primary production that's happening, how much of this photosynthesis is occurring. Where would you expect to see the greatest amount of biodiversity, the greatest amount of life? Wherever you have the greatest amount of primary production. What do you need for primary production? You need carbon dioxide, and that's everywhere, so that's not really a limiting factor. But you also need lots and lots of water and lots of sunlight. That is why wetlands and marshes are the most productive ecosystems in Missouri, but also some of the most productive ecosystems in the entire world because they have lots and lots of sun and lots of water. And together this results in very high primary production or very high energy production. Now it doesn't stop there because the trees and the plants, the flowers, they use that energy for themselves. But then there are other organisms known as consumers that use the energy from the plants. So consumers can be broken up into 4 categories. I'm going to call them the 4 vores. So this is the story of the 4 vores. What in the world is a vor? Well, don't get too hung up on it. This is actually just part of a word. This is a suffix, so something that comes at the end of words. And it comes from the Latin word vorere, or I'm probably butchering that with my fancy American English. But this word means to devour, or to eat, or to consume. So these are the 4 types of consumers. You're going to recognize most of these. There's one new one that you might not recognize so well. The first one can be represented by this rabbit. So rabbits are herbivores. They eat the plants. They get their energy from the plants that they consume. But it doesn't end there. Now those rabbits are carrying energy themselves. So other organisms can eat them. And this brings us to the carnivores. Here I'm drawing a coyote. A coyote would, if it gets its hold of a rabbit, it would gladly eat a rabbit. This is a carnivore. Now, technically, coyotes also eat plants. They actually enjoy eating plants, persimmons, and all sorts of things. So they could also fall into this next category that we're going to mention. So far, we have herbivores, carnivores. Thirdly, we have someone like you. So what do you eat? You eat both plants and meat. So you are an omnivore. Omni meaning all. You eat everything. If you're like me, that is. Some people are vegetarians. They would be herbivores. I like my all-meat pizza, so I am an omnivore just like most humans. So let's stop here and trace the flow of energy through this ecosystem that we've drawn. Of course, it starts with the sun. The energy moves from the sun into the plants via the process of primary production. And then from the plant, it moves into an herbivore. From the herbivore, that energy moves into a carnivore. Or an omnivore may get energy from either plants or animals. So this is how energy is moving through this ecosystem. Now, it's not the end of the story because we're missing one vor. Once the energy has reached, for instance, humans or a coyote, it's at a dead end. Where does it go from there? Well, that brings the last vor. Things like crayfish, you should know something about them now, worms, microbes like bacteria, and of course fungi, such as a mushroom. Now all of these organisms survive by consuming dead and decaying matter. So after these carnivores and omnivores die off, their bodies are consumed, and essentially that energy gets recycled back into this giant circle of life. So these we call detritivores. Detritivores. Just keep in mind, these are the recyclers of the environment. Sometimes they are called decomposers. They take the energy from all of these other organisms and use it for themselves, thereby recycling that energy back into the food chain. So we call these sorts of connections between organisms, when the rabbit eats the grass and the coyote eats the rabbit, we call this a food chain. But in nature, it's much more complex than this. So this flow of energy often looks like a food web, where arrows are pointing all over the place. Next week, we will be talking about the relationships between these different organisms and how they fit into a food web. That's it for today. We will be quizzed over this material at the end of next week when we have completed part 2 of the nature of energy flow.